protections now. And I know everyone on this, many people on the Zoom, including all elected officials, have been working long and hard on this, and even are working now as our session in Albany is ending. I'm proud to support good cause eviction protections in Albany with my colleague, Senator Harlan Siegel, who joins us tonight, along with Senator Liz Krueger, who all been a leader on this. And of course, our incredible Assembly Housing Chair, Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal, who I believe will be joining us soon. We have bills you'll hear about later that we're working on in Albany to protect tenants in 421A buildings. This evening, we're, in addition to our great elected officials on the west side and east side, who are working hard to protect tenants every day, you'll receive the best information from professionals from our own local housing conservation coordinators and State Department of Homes and Community Renewal about the 421A program, where it stands and what your rights are as tenants. You'll have a chance to have your questions answered tonight. First, I'd like to invite my elected officials to say a few words, starting with State Senator Liz Krueger and then State Senator Brad Harlan Siegel.
Oh, thank you, Tony. Thank you. Hello to everyone I know on the call and people I don't know on Zoom. I really appreciate Tony giving me a few minutes to participate. I'm very pleased to see him taking on this complex issue so early in his career as our new Assembly member. You know, every day people call my office with, frankly, just total confusion about the situation for themselves in their 421A building. And that's partly because we've kept changing the program over the years, in my opinion, never really getting it right. But so tenants, you have to figure out, were you the first law, the second law, the third law? Is your landlord doing something that's legal, not legal? Are you supposed to reach out to HPD, the State Housing Authority, the tax department? Very often nobody really knows. And so you, as the tenant who's trying to figure out what's real, what do you have to do, what are your protections, and who to go to, are extremely difficult. So I'm so glad that Tony's found really excellent people to present to us tonight, because you can work through these things, but it's tough and you can't give up, and you just have to keep asking questions until you get to the right answer. So Tony, thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. And now State Senator Brad Harlan Siegel.
Thank you, Assemblymember Simone. Thank you, Senator Krueger. It's great to be here with everyone here. Tony, thank you for taking on this issue, as Senator Krueger said, and Senator Krueger for being a leader on this issue too. A big thank you to Housing Conservation Coordinators for all your work in this area, and to Housing and Community Renewal for being here tonight to share the important information that we're going to hear. You know, there are thousands of tenants in 421A buildings in our districts on the east and west side. Many of those buildings have tax credits that are expiring in the next few years. And we too, my team, Natalie, who's on, and I frequently get calls from tenants who are concerned about what's going to happen if they're to their apartments when the 421A tax credit ends. So this is incredibly important. In 2022, the 421A tax abatement program expired and wasn't renewed by the state legislature. The state legislature let the program expire because 421A has been incredibly expensive, and frankly, we didn't think it was producing enough housing that was affordable to most New Yorkers. And fiscal year 2022, the tax expenditures, foregone property tax from 421A reached close to $2 billion in that year alone. Meanwhile, more than 60% of the income restricted units created under 421A were built for families earning 130% of the AMI, or well over $100,000 a year. So there are a lot of important discussions around 421A having expired, but we can't forget about the tenants who currently live in a 421A building, and that's what we're going to learn about tonight. I just wanted to mention a couple of things. Tenants do receive misleading and confusing information about the rights to stay in their apartment. This includes lease riders, which state that the building's 421A tax benefits expire when it expires, the apartment will no longer be rent stabilized. That is generally not the case. And we've been working with Assemblymember Simone and Senator Krueger and HCC to introduce legislation to address this issue, to prohibit landlords from including incorrect information on leases and renewals to tenants in 421A units. We've also been working to audit 421A developers, so we know that as taxpayers, we're getting our money's worth. So I look forward to continuing to work with everyone here, including the Assembly member and Senator, and ensure that we have integrity in the existing 421A program. Thanks, Tony, so much.
Thank you, Brad. It looks like our great Assembly Housing Chair, Linda Rosenthal, is stuck in a meeting, literally talking about housing. So we're going to move on the program. Emma, I think we need to go on to let the housing experts present.
Yeah, and we'll actually start with Yadira Jimenez, who is the housing expert in our office, and she will take it away.
Yay, Yadira.
Yadira, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I'd like to start by thanking you, Tony, for supporting me in my mission to inform people and make sure that they don't self-evict. So thank you, Tony, for being so supportive. Thank you, State Senator Liz Krueger, for joining us today. Senator Brad Hoyman for joining us today as well, and for also sitting on a board with me back in December for a similar conversation, if you remember, on an HCC conversation. I will start with a little bit of history on 421A. After widespread concerns for declining residential housing construction, New York passed the original 421A tax exemption program in 1971. Since then, the program has been modified several times, and buildings follow different rules based on when they were built. Nevertheless, this program allows developers and landlords to pay little to no property taxes for the duration of the tax abatement. There is a lot of misinformation about this program, especially about when it expires and what happens to the residents living in these units. We hope we can answer your questions today. Many buildings built since 1974, which ordinarily would not be subject to rent regulation, have been placed under rent regulation because the building owner chose to receive 421A tax benefits. If a building became subject to requirements of Section 421A after July 3rd of 1984, the owner is required to include in each lease and renewal lease a notice in at least 12-point type font informing the tenant that the apartment shall become deregulated upon the expiration of the last lease entered into during the tax benefit period. The notice also needs to state the approximate date on which such tax benefit period is scheduled to expire. I know this is all a little bit confusing, and this is why we're here today. Buildings where construction began before June 30th of 2008, failure to include this notice in all leases for the tenant in occupancy at the time the tax benefit expires means that the apartment will remain under rent regulation and the tenant can continue to renew their rent stabilized lease. The apartment remains rent regulated until the tenant vacates the apartment. The inclusion of the required notice in all leases deregulates the apartment at the end of the last lease entered into during the tax benefit period. Now, generally, regarding buildings where construction began on or after June 30th, 2008, those apartments in 421A tax exempt buildings designated as affordable units must remain rent stabilized for 35 years, even if a tenant vacates and a new tenant moves into the apartment. Tenants in occupancy at the end of the 35-year period remain under rent stabilization until they vacate the apartment. In June of 2022, the tax benefit expired for many landlords. which is why we're in such a frenzy. Whether or not tenants in affordable units remain stabilized is dependent on the year the building was built, what other programs the building is subject to, and your regulatory agreement. Unfortunately, many tenants receive misinformation about this. Please do not self-evict. Come to our office. Reach out to your local tenant advocacy groups. Allow yourself to be educated. Do not self-evict. Please allow me to introduce Alex Young.
Thank you so much, Yadira. I'm Alex from the West Side Neighborhood Alliance. I like to say that WISNA, West Side Neighborhood Alliance, is the baby sibling of HCC. So what I like to say is that with these 6 websites that you see, no one's going to force you to use them. And a nonprofit can help you, especially with the first 3. And they're pretty good with the others as well. The journey that you take in learning about your tenants' rights, you'll also find that learning about your building's facts go hand in hand with that. So out of these 6 sites, I guess the best of the 6 would be the DAP portal. It's by a nonprofit called ANHD, and you can actually get to the others from it. And it gives you the all-important Department of Finance address for your building. Like this address is 271 West 47th, but the Department of Finance has it as 778th Avenue. So the DAP portal shows that, as well as site number 2, the NYU Furman Center. The 2 sites where you have to be really careful are number 5, ACRIS, and number 4, HPD online. The HPD site has only a few 421A pages geared for tenants. So if you're on that website and what you're reading seems completely incoherent or irrelevant to you, chances are you're looking at a research page written by HPD geared for landlords. So those outnumber tenant pages by about 10 to 1. But where the HPD site shines is in explaining the different iterations of 421A, such as 421A 1-15 or 421A 16, etc. But those links are for landlords. However, nobody's stopping you from reading those landlord pages and simply flipping the perspective. ACRIS is a great resource once you master it to connect with your neighbors. Unfortunately, it has the most steps, and because it has the most steps, it has the most pitfalls and chances to stumble. But we created one single link for you because all of these are multi-step and there's not enough time to go into them tonight. So on the next slide, it shows how you can get the step-by-step for all of those 6 websites. You just go to gg.gg facts baby facts, and to see the slideshow, it's facts baby facts -2. So Yadira, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Alex. And last, but actually, thank you so much. Allow me to introduce Dejong from HCR.
Yadira, it tells me that I'm not able to screen share.
Dejong, you're not able to screen share?
It tells me that it has been disabled.
Okay, my apologies, everyone. Please hold one moment.
You should be able to screen share now.
Why is it not letting me? Okay, thank you. All right, let me actually just go back to the presentation really briefly. Okay, good evening. My name is DJ Kwan, and I'm here tonight representing the New York State Division of Housing and Community Renewals, Office of Rent Administration. So our office regulates rent stabilized apartments, And while a building receives 421A, the building temporarily falls under rent stabilization. So what this means for the tenants is that tenants receive certain rights, such as the right to have their leases renewed, to have their rent increased by lawful guidelines, and to have services and repairs, and so on. And upon the expiration, depending on when the building construction began, there are different requirements, which Yadira did a wonderful job of explaining. That is a very complex issue. We do have some information in our fact sheet number 41, which covers tax abatement about how the deregulation is done. So what I'm going to really talk about is what happens if they feel their apartment is now being deregulated but unlawfully, or their rents are being increased, but it is excessive and unlawful. Well, there is a complaint that can be filed with our office. It's called the overcharge complaint, and it can be filed in two different ways, online or by paper form. And I'm going to go over the paper form very briefly. You can find the paper version on our website, which is hcr.ny.gov/tenant. Once you're on our website, simply scroll down until you see the tenant and owner forms, and then look for the complaint of overcharge, which is the form RA 89. It's a fillable PDF that you can fill in, then print out and mail to us. Or you could do a little bit differently by online, and that is through what we call the Rent Connect. So the Rent Connect, which you can reach by going to rent.hcr.ny.gov. It's an online portal. You don't need to create an account. Once you're in the portal, you simply choose tenant. And then you will see on the left-hand corner, the list of applications that's available online. Simply find the one that says file rent overcharge and click. There is a brief overview and introduction about the complaint, but once you're ready to proceed, you can simply hit continue. First thing that you will need is your building address. You can search for the building address two ways, one by the registration number, which is available on the annual apartment registration form, which is served by the owner to the tenant once a year. If you don't remember the number or you don't have it, simply search by your building address. Please note, though, the address with directional prefix or suffix, such as east, west, south, those need to be entered separately. So I have as an example, 320 East Mosholu Parkway South. So this one is basically everything. In that case, you need to separate them out. So street house number is 320. Direction prefix is east. Street name is Mosholu. Street type is a parkway. Suffix is south. Or you could actually go ahead and enter the minimum, and this sometimes works better, especially if you have a complicated address. The only two things that you really need to enter to proceed to a search is the street house number and the name. Simply enter 320 and Mosholu, hit search by address, and it should come up. Now, if, however, let's say, let me try a different one. You search for your building and you get this message, nothing found. Well, first, please check to make sure that you spell the street name correctly, because that could actually be an issue. Or a second possibility, the building may not have been registered yet. If that is the case, please just reach out to us just as the screen instructs you, by emailing us. And I'm going to just show you, we don't have time to go through the entire application, but let me just show you what it looks like. So let's say that you found your building. Simply you hit select, and then you can go ahead and start on the application. However, there is one thing that I need to stress. This application does not require login. However, it does mean it cannot save information. So you do need to make sure that you have plenty of time at hand to finish the application, that if you have any attachment that you would like to upload, make sure to have it at hand, because you cannot save and come back to the application later. So this is actually very important. And another question that we get a lot, what kind of supporting documents are we talking about? It could be leases or proofs of payment, like rent receipts, canceled checks, money order receipts, statements. You may also have court orders, or perhaps you have other supporting document you would like to present. Obviously, in order to upload them, you will need to have them in electronic format, like a PDF or a JPEG, and so on. If you do not have them, you can in fact submit them later. In fact, you will be asked to submit them later. So if you don't have them in electronic format, it's fine. You can still go ahead and fill out the application, but be ready to be prepared to submit them later, because we will be asking for that. The application itself is actually very user-friendly. However, if you have a different mailing address, please make sure to give us both your current mailing address as well as the building address where the complaint is about. I think I may be out of time, so Yadira, I'm going to return the control back to you. And one last thing. If you do run into problems, you are always welcome to contact our info line at 833-499-0343, or submit a question through our portal, which is portal.hcr.ny.gov. Is it okay if I enter that into the chat?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Yadira.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully you can join us for some more of these.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you. We're going to hand over host power back to Emma. And last, but certainly not least, an organization that took me in when my landlord was not playing so nice. I truly came in like a lost puppy. They opened their arms to me and helped me start a tenant association from literally nothing. 3 years later, and we've had some amazing wins, even when COVID tried to slow us down. So without further ado, housing conservation coordinators, come and take it away.
Thanks, Yadira. I think you folks are going to handle the slide, right?
Yes, Emma will take it away.
Awesome. All right, folks, my name is Georgie. I'm the Senior Community Organizer for Housing Conservation Coordinators and Westside Neighborhood Alliance, and I'll be speaking today a little bit on how to have these conversations with your neighbors in your building. Next slide, please. So the basics of what is community organizing, right? Community organizing is the act of bringing people together to build power and achieve common goals. So how to organize your building. First is you want to find some common issue. So we're focusing on 421A today, so that'll be our common issue that we'll be speaking to our neighbors about. Then you want to set up some time for some outreach. You want to talk with your neighbors. You want to door knock, distribute flyers for any meetings that you have scheduled, and potentially have one-on-ones. And we'll talk a little bit more on what one-on-ones are within the presentation. Aside from that, you want to schedule a first meeting. And at that meeting, you want to categorize what the issues are within the group and for individual issues. So what's building wide, right? Like if there's any building wide repairs, what's that, what does that look like? And if there's any individual repairs, what are folks, individuals' issues? And then you want to reach out to a local nonprofit or elected official. Next slide, please. So some common issues that come up within the building when you're talking with your neighbors, right? 9 out of 10, it's repairs. A lot of times repairs are the motivation to start tenants associations within buildings that create conversations between neighbors. Repairs are always a big issue that we've seen. Another one is management being non-responsive, right? A lot of times management's not responsive with the tenants, the tenant association, there's just no communication at all. So that's another common issue that folks are having. No communication from the certifier. So a lot of times when you have to recertify, there's no communication. You submit your application and your documents that you need, and you never hear back, or you don't know if the certification was approved, if it went through, if there's anything else you're missing. There's just no communication. So that's another common issue that folks are having. Another one is landlord is raising rents. Landlords are always threatening tenants every day and that they're gonna hike up their rents, right? So understanding how and when RGB, the Rent Guidelines Board, percentages are part of this. So the RGB, votes every year, and they vote on how high your rent will be increased. So make sure you look out for that. 421A ending. What does it mean for your ability to stay? Explore whether there's light tech or e-light. Right. So when 421A is expiring, that's always a conversation starter, and there's always questions about what happens next, right? So that's always a common issue. And then knowing the type of the 421A your landlord has. So there's 421A 1 through 15, 421A 16, 421A 17, etc. Those are common issues that tenant association will be having. Next slide, please. So talking with your neighbors. Door knocking. When you're door knocking, you want to have a sign-in sheet to collect information and contact information from any good conversations that you've had with your neighbors, anyone that really seems interested or wants to take a role within the tenant association. You always want to get those contact information so you can follow up. So having a sign-in sheet when you're door knocking and doing outreach within your building is super helpful. Having a flyer for your meeting. You should always have a meeting scheduled before you door knock. That way you have something to give to folks, right? So you should always have a meeting, try to have a meeting scheduled and try to have some type of information for that meeting on hand to pass out to folks. And then dig deep. When you're at the door knocking and talking to your neighbors, right? You could share your personal stories. What made you feel like you wanted to wake up today and door knock on everyone's door to talk about 421A, right? There's a lot of frustration that happens around these stuff. So sharing your personal stories often helps build relationships and it helps people get involved, right? Hearing that their neighbor is experiencing something that they may be experiencing, and motivates them to want to join or to learn more, at least, about what the issues are within the building. So a little bit about one-to-one. So one-to-ones is an intentional meeting to build relationship or make an ask. So we use this to build, our relationship within the tenant association. So once you have a tenant association established, you've been having meetings, you want to schedule one-on-ones with your neighbors to see how you could solidify the relationship or even ask them to take on a bigger role within the association or within the building. So just to break down what a one-to-one is, a one-to-one, is intentional meeting to build relationships or make an ask. It should be 15 to 30 minutes or 30 minutes to an hour face-to-face conversation. It's a way to identify new leaders and activate activists. These conversations shouldn't be a surprise. You should be honest on why you want to meet, whether it's to ask them to take on a bigger role within the association, like I mentioned earlier, or just, to deepen and build your relationship with your neighbor, right? So you want to be transparent on why you want to meet with the person. It's also an opportunity to learn new skills, participate in different capacities. You can learn what this person, what the person is interested in. You may have a neighbor that has worked for the New York Times, right? And you have a press conference coming up. And within that conversation, you realize that this person could help support with a press release that, that the association is trying to put out. So having these conversations helps just figure out, who's who and find out ways on how you can work together and move the work forward. And learn more about each other. Active listening, eye contact, repeating back, and smiling. It's always important to ensure the person knows that you're listening and you're there, you know, to really have a great conversation. Next slide, please. So your first meeting, this is just a sample agenda, what a first meeting could look like. You should always have an intro, allow folks to introduce yourselves, you know, go over what's the purpose of the meeting and why folks came together today. Like I mentioned earlier, you want to identify key issues, categorize them into building, which is, you know, that's group related. So everything that affects everyone within the building, that's a group related issue. And then if there's any individual issues within like folks' apartments that they're having or having with, you know, when they're trying to recertify, you know, categorize that and as an individual, and just be clear on what the issues are for the group and for individual folks. Recruit for roles. You know, you always want support or, you know, an extra pair of hands to help you door knock, do outreach. What we found that works is floor captains, nominating one person for floor to be in charge of that floor to pass out any, you know, material that the TA is going to be pushing out, or any meeting flyers or anything that is related to passing out information. You can have a floor captain to help support around that. And then you also always want to have next steps and closeout. And what next steps could look like after first meeting is, you know, the tenant association agreed to reach out to a local nonprofit to get support around organizing their building, or to reach out to their landlord, or, you know, reach out to elected officials' office to get support in that way as well. Next slide, please. So introduction to HCC and Affordable Housing Leaders Group. So we wanted to just talk about a little bit about the work that we've done that came out of organizing with working with 421A tenants, right? So HCC had an Affordable Housing Leaders Group. Housing Conservation Coordinators is a neighborhood-based nonprofit focused on Manhattan's West Side. For years, we've been working with tenant leaders who live in 421A, LIHTC, and inclusionary units, and we see the same issues arise time and time again. As HCC's Affordable Housing Leaders Group launched in late 2020, it is composed of tenant leaders living in various buildings. HCC collaborates with these leaders on solutions such as legislation to protect and create affordable housing in New York. When available, HCC also invites experts who educate the tenant leaders in monthly meetings. Example, Speaker of the Assemblies, Program Council, and Special Staff. So this is a group that we've been working with out of organizing, and the next slide we'll talk about what we passed from like what happened from the organizing that we did with this group. Next slide, please. So from this group, right, what HCC and the Affordable Housing Leaders Group has won was this HPD fact sheet, which is partially shown here. And you can read it at the link that's provided on the slide. We can also drop it in the chat. Prior to October 2021, this fact sheet didn't exist. So HCC and the Affordable Housing Leaders Group put pressure on HPD for much of 2021 to create it, because shocking as it sounds, there was no central resource. So from having these, you know, conversations from folks like Yadira and Alex Young door knocking within their buildings and talking to their neighbors, you know, out came this Affordable Housing Leaders Group, and we were able to win the HPD fact sheet that hasn't been out, like we mentioned, prior to October 2021. So this is a big win for the group. Next slide, please. 421A buildings in our catchment area. So we created a map in our catchment areas of the West Side, and it's buildings that are leaving the program either this year or next year. We could also share that link with you as well. Next slide, please. And these are just another important links that we wanted to make sure folks have. So there's the HPD fact sheet where you can access the fact sheet that we spoke about a little while ago. There's another fact sheet from HCR that has some information on 421A that we found useful. We also have some information on 421A on our organization website. So if you go to housingconservationcoordinators.org, you'll be able to find some good resources on 421A information. So these are just links, you know, it's hard. I know we've been hearing this hard to find information about what happens next or any Q&A or like any fact sheets around 421A stuff. So these are some links that, you know, provide some of those information. Next slide, please. And this is just continuing. You know, Alex went over the building research earlier. So this is just to amplify that. You know, you could do some where to research building specific, lease and writers, ANHD's portal, coredata.nyc. You can click on the building address and then regulatory tools. Also ACRIS for regulatory agreements. And then there's general information for HPD and then HCR again. Next slide, please. And then this is our contact info. So if you have any questions, concerns, if there's something that doesn't seem right, if you get a weird lease writer, or if your landlord is going to tell you, hey, next lease renewal, your apartment's going to be market rate, you're not going to be affordable anymore, or any confusion, you can always reach out to housing conservation coordinators. We have the contact info for our director of organizing, Charlie Dulick, and then my information. And then we also have, you're able to do intake. If you're interested in signing up for intake, you could call our main number at 212-541-5996 for more information, or to schedule an appointment. Our hours are Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 9 to 5. And then we also have Monday Night Legal Clinic, which is every Monday from 5 to 7. Appointments are required, and you could call our main line again, which is 212-541-5996 to make an appointment. And what's cool about our Monday Night Legal Clinic, that anyone in the city can call and schedule an appointment. So you do not have to only live in Manhattan to sign up for our Monday Night Legal Clinic. It does have to be housing related, but not Manhattan related. So you could have, family in Brooklyn, the Bronx. If you have friends in Queens, or, have a legal question, they could that's housing related. They could call and schedule an appointment. Next slide, please. Yes. Action. Yep, awesome. Thanks,
Georgie. Thank you so much. I tell you guys, Georgie has been phenomenal. He has seen me from the beginning of my journey. So thank you. We're gonna open up the Q&A with the amazing, phenomenal Lynn Horowitz. Lynn, I will hand the floor over to you.
All right. Thanks, Yadira. Thanks everyone for participating, coming to the Zoom. And yeah, I guess people can just put questions in the chat. Yadira, do you want to moderate the chat, or you want me to?
I'm happy to moderate the chat, or people can also raise their hands, and then I will call on them in order.
Great.
Marguerite, I saw you first.
I thank you for addressing me. I am in a 421A. It has expired June 30th, 2022. The building was built in 2000. So from what Yadira was saying, and what I understand from my reading, is that if that bold type rider is attached to your lease with the rent stabilization lease, they have the right to deregulate it once these rights expire. Now, it did expire. They offered, and I know other tenants in the building that offered us a renewal. The renewal is rent stabilized with the city's increase. And we've called the office, and I've reached out to HPD, and they tell me that as long as I am living here, it will not be market value. I will continue to be rent stabilized. I have it in writing from my landlord. Is that true, or that's my question. Am I allowed to still be a rent stabilized tenant, or are they allowed to, maybe in the next 2 years, I have a 2 year, maybe in the next year, they can destabilize it? Sorry, it's so long, but that's my question, my main concern.
That's okay. I mean, so this is the most common question that people that live in buildings with a 421A tax abatement have, right? A lot of buildings, the tax abatement is expiring within the next couple of years. So lots and lots of tenants have these questions. And as my colleague said during their presentations in the past hour, is, it depends on a number of factors. So when the building was built, which 421A program they're in, if you're in an income restricted unit, if you've received the correct riders, if the building also, receives government assistance and is a part of other regulatory schemes. And I'm going to say a big qualifier, which, not to disappoint, but I'm not going to be able during the Q&A, I'm not going to be able to give exact answers on whether you, in your specific building or your specific situation, you will remain rent stabilized or not. But I will do the best to guide you all in the right direction. And as we all understand here, and one of the major problems with the 421A program is that the law is very confusing and tenants' rights are not clear, and there's been a lot of misinformation, and tenants get riders that tell them they're not going to be subject to rent stabilization when in fact maybe they are. For example, if they're in an income restricted unit, and there's just so much conflicting information and so much misinformation to tenants that it's really important for tenants in these, for tenants to become aware, and it's, and attend know your rights presentations, although it really shouldn't be the burden of the tenant, to have to seek this information out. But what I have noticed about tenants that have at least come to HCC seeking legal information or advice about their rights in their apartments is that people have done a lot of their own research, and their research is excellent and very similar to the research that we also do. So without giving an exact answer, and of course, like Georgie was saying, you can call, even though you might not get an appointment right away, HCC, HCC has a Monday night legal clinic that you could do a phone free intake consultation appointment for 15 minutes. There are no income requirements for the 15-minute consultation, or just have to be a New York City resident. But anyway, all that to say that generally, if one is in an income restricted unit in one of these, in a building with 421A, and usually 421A is layered with, so right, that's a state tax exemption. So usually that's layered. The building also receives some sort of, not always, but often the building receives some sort of federal tax credit as well, which limits income in some percentage of units and other things. There's multiple layers. But generally, if you're in an income restricted or affordable unit in a 421A building, then you generally have the right to remain in that unit until you're vacant. And the unit generally remains rent stabilized. That's a general thing without, looking at the regulatory agreement of the building and knowing exactly which 421A program it's under and all of that.
Are these regulatory agreements available to tenants? I've yet to be able to find it for this building. I mean, I know that I'm a 421A15, but the regulatory agreement would be important, wouldn't it?
It may be. So generally, if you're in an income restricted unit, the unit will most likely remain rent stabilized after the tax abatement expires. If you're not, and you're in a market rate unit, like you didn't have to apply based on your income, then if you did receive the riders with your initial lease and every single lease renewal after, then your unit probably can become exempt from rent stabilization. To get the regulatory agreement, right, you can do a FOIL request, but also it's a little hard to find, but you can use the New York City ACRIS website. It's the city register. There's a link to it or you can Google NYC ACRIS and put in your building address, and then you get you get a big long list of all of these documents, mortgage documents, agreements, deeds, satisfactions of mortgage. But you can find, or you can not always, because it's not a requirement that these are uploaded to be online. it's more of a convenience thing, but you can generally find your building's regulatory agreement there. And if it's not there, you can FOIL it.
I think I could understand it, but it might be something that would.
So that goes us back to what Georgie's presentation, which honestly, it's really helpful and efficient and powerful for tenants to organize in buildings like this, because it doesn't make sense for 100 people to do the same exact research, right? Most of the tenants have very similar interests. They just want to know the information. So, if tenants can get together and like maybe a couple of people do some legwork to get some information, it could help most of the tenants in the building.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and in the chat, Alex posted a link of step-by-step, a link which takes you to a page that gives you step-by-step instructions on how to research your own building. And it's exactly the same steps I do when someone comes to me with a question. It's, I guess, gg.gg/facts. But everyone should bookmark that because it's very helpful.
Which one are you talking about? Which bookmark?
I'm just bookmark it on your own browser, gg.gg/facts.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go to the next question, Lyric.
Hi, I'm in a building. I've been fighting with HCR and HPD for 8 years. They are extremely, I would say dysfunctional, but I'm going to go ahead and say non-functional. But there was a girl, Kara, that just posted she's having a lot of issues with her building and her landlord. And I was referring her to the Tenant Protection Unit, TPU. So I'm putting that email address in the chat for you. Please contact her. Her name is Jeannie Boyle. She's a badass and she'll help you. One of the big issues with 421A that I found, I'm in a 3-unit building, and a lot of these buildings, these older buildings, were built to be owner occupied. And of course they're not. Now, what that means, owner occupied, is a lot of times there's only 3 meters, 3 hot water heaters, 3 boilers, none of which end up belonging to the owner. And the tenants end up furnishing the common area utilities unknowingly. Now, this was something that I was made aware of back in 2016 when our landlord tried to deregulate the building and evict everybody out of the building. And it's something that I've been fighting with DHCR and HPD about. The amount of hacking that's had to go on to disconnect from the tenants has been extremely damaging. But neither of these agencies know how to document the base service of gas, even though the previous owner claimed the base service of gas on their 421A paperwork. And the law says if you claim it, you've got to provide it. So how would you handle such a situation? Because it's not just me. A lot of buildings, thousands of buildings were built this way. And DHCR's position is go back to HPD or go to the Public Service Commission or just go. And HPD's position is la DHCR.
So this is utility. Yeah, this is a unique situation to your building. You're right. Lots of buildings have had different.
Not just to my buildings, to a lot of 3-unit buildings.
Yeah,
I pulled the plans on a lot of them, and a large amount of them. And all of those tenants in these buildings are being tapped into unknowingly.
So to be honest, I haven't specifically worked on this type of issue, but I would generally, if you haven't yet, I would contact your elected official's office and see what they can do in terms of advocating for you. That would be my best advice at this point.
This is year 8. That's horrible advice. What we need is the state to step in and address HPD's lack of proper oversight and their lack of management. There's been absolutely no consequence for HPD just, oh, we were ignoring the laws and I mean, DHCR, I'm sorry, you tell people to go to DHCR, that is a 2 to 10 year turnaround for simple complaints. Don't go to DHCR, get a nonprofit attorney and take it to the Supreme Court. You'll see the end of it, hopefully before you die. DHCR is they don't know how to handle 421A issues or 421A, a lack of registration with 421A. If your apartment's not properly registered, you have to go to HPD and deal with that. And HPD has no desire to deal with that. There's probably 12 people that work in that office. Sorry, I'm not the typical 421A person. I've been fighting with HPD over 421A since 2016.
Yeah, so thank you so much for your comments and your I'm sorry I can't be more helpful, but I think everyone on the call from DHCR and HPD has heard your comments. So thank
Hello,
you.
Lynn. I have a question. This is Rhonda.
Hi, Rhonda. We have a couple of people that are waiting, so I just want to go
Oh.
through people that have had their hands up. But
You know
we-
what? I cannot find the hands up option. I've been trying.
That's
Where do I
okay. I'll note that you want to ask a question, but we're going to go to the people who had their hands up.
Sure. Would have had mine.
Jerry, you're next.
Thank you. Thank you for the seminar. I'm in was a 421A high rise in Manhattan in your district, and I'm looking at that registration. It says it's 421A market rate unit, and it went out of 421A last year, and they informed all the tenants that as you indicated, the riders would expire and that the rent stabilization program then would end. And I was struck by the comment Brad Hoylman, who's my senator, made a second ago when he said that the 421A rider may be incorrect. And here's the question, and it's really crazy. On the front of the lease, it actually says if you collected a preferential rent from a tenant, on or after June 14, 2019, when the new law went in, right? You have to continue to offer and collect the preferential rent for the duration of the tenancy. That's on the front of the lease. The back of the lease had the rider. I asked Brad, which one do you follow? The front of the lease says I'm going to be stabilized forever. The building was built in 2010. And the back of the lease said the rider overrides the front of the lease. So I'm confused, quite frankly. I don't know which one I should follow.
So this issue, it hasn't been litigated, but and I can't answer for uncertainty, but unfortunately, if people are in market rate units and they received riders saying that their unit would become deregulated after the expiration of the tax benefit, every single year you have to receive that rider.
We did. Yeah.
Then the building is not, then your apartment is not subject to rent stabilization. And the preferential rent rule only applies to apartments that are subject to rent stabilization. And that is my inkling of what would happen if you ended up, if there ended up being a court case against you where you litigated this. That is my prediction of the way it would play out in court.
So nothing's changed since we talked about this before. Okay. The rider overrides the front of the lease, which is permanently on the lease. All the leases have that and the riders override it. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
I just, the riders don't override a lease. So I'm not, right now during this Q&A, I'm not looking at people's individual lease agreements. If people's lease agreements, say something, for example, let's just say, for whatever reason, a landlord gave someone a lease and said, no matter what happens to the tax abatement, your apartment is going to be treated with all the same rights as rent stabilization for the entire time that you live there. You're going to have a preferential rent, then your lease would trump. So I'm talking generally that a preferential rent only applies to a rent stabilized apartment.
Yeah, the front of the lease is basically saying stabilized And as long as you stay there, you'll have stabilization, but it doesn't say anything about the rider. Then it says see rider at the end, and then you go to the rider, and the rider has been filed every year, and it said it expired, which ultimately happened last year, unless the law changes, right? Isn't there a move to change the law? Did I hear that correctly?
You did, but I'll let someone from our elected's office refresh on the changing of the law, but
I can jump in on that. Yeah, this is Natalie. I'm from State Senator Hoylman Siegel's office. The legislation that we were talking about is, I'll drop a link in the chat just so everyone can see, is around preventing landlords from sending inaccurate lease riders to tenants in affordable units. So, you know, I hope that legislation would make the landlords a little more aware of, you know, who they're sending the lease riders to, and not just send out the blanket ones to everybody, even though they might be incorrect. Does that help answer that? And I'll put a link in the chat so everyone can read more about it.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Okay, we're a little bit past 7 o'clock, but if everyone is okay to stay on for a few more minutes, I want to try and get through a couple more questions. So the next person who had their hand up was Philip White.
Yes, thank you so much. Cool. I just had a question as far as occupancy, because I was told that in New York City, if you have a daughter, like I live in a rent stabilized, well, I'm in a 428 program with MEMA, with the related building. And I was told that if you have a daughter under a certain age or reaching a certain age, because I'm in a studio, that I was allowed to get an upgrade because you're not supposed to have a female and a male, like if she's over 6 years old, within like a certain amount of square feet. And I was wondering what that law was, if anyone was versed on that, or how that works.
I think what maybe you have heard, or so there are like occupancy standards it's usually for federally subsidized units where there's like a certain bedroom size for a certain family size, and but there's no law preventing a father and a daughter to live in a studio that just in general in a regular apartment that I'm aware of. You know, people ask about transferring units to a larger apartment size, and actually HCC organizers worked really hard with one building to get a transfer policy, because there is no transfer policy in place there's no standard operating procedure for transfer requests and in 421A buildings. So people just work together to try to push management to make a transfer policy. So that's something that tenants could do as collectively. But I don't know of anything requiring, like prohibiting a father and a female daughter from living in a studio together.
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily prohibit, but just for make it easier for like an upgrade. Something along the lines of, and I talked with the building management, just because something along the lines of female versus male, the occupancy, the closeness, some way in which you're supposed to get this upgrade. Now, I'm completely fine staying, but if I could get upgrade, by all means, I was interested. And I had one other question as far as the building I'm into. I actually had a medical exemption and was supposed to get an upgrade last year, but then was told that the building I'm in is actually 2 buildings, even though it's one single address. And because it's 2 buildings, I'm in building A, the apartment that was available was in building B, and I would have to now make the old income that I made when I first moved in, which was like under $30,000 or something like that, in order to move into the building, quote unquote, B, even though it's one single address, one single unit, or like one single number, if that makes sense.
I see. So for if someone has, you know, a medical reason for requesting a transfer, what they should put the request in writing and refer to it as a reasonable accommodation, because that's what you're requesting. requesting to be transferred because of some sort of medical issue or change in family size, and you want a reasonable accommodation. I mean, so this was similar to the group that got together and, really fought for a transfer policy. I'm not, if the buildings are technically two different buildings, but it's the same owner, then maybe there's an argument that you don't need to requalify for the unit. But this is why, just back to organize, like, this is why it's really helpful to talk to your neighbors and work out things collectively. These programs are relatively newish, right? Maybe a couple decades, but there's all these different nuances that come up, and there just aren't protocols or procedures for different things like transfer. Like if you're in a HUD subsidized building, there are all kinds of procedures and policies for requesting transfers. In 421, like buildings that are 421A, there is not all kinds of guidelines about how to ask for a transfer or what the landlord has to give you or upgrade you to a larger apartment if you have a growing family or if you have a medical condition. These things don't exist. A lot of things in these programs weren't really thought out. It's one of the reasons why, they're not being renewed, or they weren't renewed. And, all you can do is try, right? You put your requests in writing, and then if they don't follow, and organize and talk to your neighbors and see if you can get a group together to put pressure on the landlord to create, to create more fair policies and so that people get similar treatment.
Sure. I guess just to finalize, that is legal then for them to say that this is one address, one unit, and there's two buildings within this one address.
I'm not sure. That's a specific question that I just don't know the exact answer to, and I don't want to give you a wrong answer. I don't know that. I'm not sure.
Thank you.
If I can interject really quickly, Lynn, my building was the one that actually was able to come up with a transfer policy. And when we did the transfer policy, they actually made me go through the whole recertify. I had to reapply and go through the income process all over again, because they said that if they didn't, they wouldn't be in compliance with the program with inclusionary housing. So I just thought I should share that was a part of how they went through the transfer policy. They implemented the transfer policy. Just wanted to share that with you all.
Okay, thanks, Yadira. I may have heard, I might be misremembering, but I may have heard anecdotes about someone transferring where they didn't, in a different building, where they didn't make them reapply again. So, I think there's just, things are not universal. I'm not sure though.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Thank you. I want to go next to somebody who had raised their hand in the chat. Mary Rodriguez, are you ready?
I am. Hi. I've been after and waiting for a meeting like this, but there's so many conflicting information. Lynn, you gave some information that some of it is very conflicting. HRDC or HDRC. I was there last year, and what the lady that was speaking before, Lyric, said, they do not know how to handle 421A questions or filings if you have any questions. I've been in my building now 19 years. The 421A tax abatement is going to expire next year, they told us, our landlord. I have my regulatory agreement. I have my 421A rider. You said before, Lynn, that if we signed a 421A rider every year or every time our lease renewals, that we're not rent stabilized?
If you're in a market rate unit, if you're in an income restricted unit, that is, you remain rent stabilized, most likely.
Our buildings are mixed. So you have market value and you have 80-20.
Right. So the answer is apartment specific. It's not building specific.
Okay. Okay, because we're being told it's going to expire next year. They say our rents may not go up, as another lady said, I think it was Marguerite, said that it's stated that as long as you live there, you will remain rent stabilized unless you move out. But I never seen that anywhere on my lease or rent rider or anything like that.
So if
It's scary because I have no place to go after next year. And I can't pay $4,000 rent, which is what they will charge for a market value apartment since I have a 2-bedroom. You know, gentleman that was asking before about having a daughter and being a male, there is a stipulation, or there is where when you rent, I rented in 2003 in my building. I had a son and he was younger then. And I got a 2-bedroom because I was a female, he was a boy. If I had a daughter, I would only get 1 bedroom. So that's something you should look into with your landlord. But my question is, I just want to know, what do I do next year when their tax abatement ends? When my landlord's tax abatements end, they say they're not going to raise our rent, but there's nothing in writing stating that. So what do we do to protect ourselves? Because like I said, I can't pay market value rent and I have no other place to move to.
So if you or anyone here is living in an affordable unit or an income restricted unit, meaning they got the unit because their income was below a certain amount.
Correct.
Then usually it means that the unit will remain rent stabilized and your rent won't change because of the loss of the tax abatement.
But it will go up according to the city guidelines every year or every 2 years.
In a rent stabilized apartment, yes, they are, well, but also if you're in an income restricted unit, there may be other regulatory agreements at play. I don't, like, sometimes in 421A buildings, there are other federal, there are other, not just pure.
They don't have any federal tax abatements. Everything is just the 421A tax abatement that they have, and it's only 20% of the building that's 80/20. And I am in one of those apartments.
It sounds like there are probably, if people refer to a building as 80/20, it usually means that there's some sort of other layered on tax credit that involves other income restrictions. But anyway, I know a lot of individuals are very nervous, scared about the tax abatements expiring.
And we don't get a definite answer from anyone. Nobody gets a definite answer. We need definite answers. Not everybody could go and afford a private lawyer to go and fight in court.
So there are things that
some of us make.
I don't want to cut you off, but I just want to give some helpful information that for individuals. So one thing is, don't move out, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to hire a private lawyer, but if you get a termination notice or an eviction notice, you don't need to move out. You can have, it doesn't have to be a lawyer. You can go to an elected official's office. I know Tony Simone has a housing clinic. I know,
I've been to your office over 15 years ago, and then I stopped going because the people that were working there weren't helpful either. So
great.
I don't know what's going on.
HCC has a Monday night housing clinic, like we were saying. So these tax programs, they're all expiring for the first time now. These are novel issues and people don't want to give wrong information. And sometimes lawyers and other advocates, we don't always know for certain the answers. Okay, so, it's because the answers may not exist, and maybe where people are fighting, and lots of people that were presenting on the panel today are working really hard to try to change things, to make things more clear so tenants aren't living in uncertainty here, while landlords are getting these big tax breaks. So the most important takeaway here is, if you have individual questions, as these tax abatements are expiring, there's going to be more and more information sharing and testing of the
But we can't
legality
wait
of
till that
things.
happens, because I don't want to wait till my tax abatement in my building expires and then they raise my rent, and then what do? I've been speaking with Natalie in Senator Holtman's office because we need answers.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut anyone off, but we've gone well over our time. And Lynn, you've been beyond gracious in answering every single question that has come your way. unfortunately, we're gonna have to end the Q&A. And I strongly recommend that everyone that has a question, reach out to our office, Tony Simone's office. Emma, if you don't mind, please in the drop our contact information, our phone number, email address, set up an appointment, and we can point you in the right direction. You can set up an intake appointment with myself, and I can lead you in the right direction. We want to help every single person on this call, give individualized information, but unfortunately on this call tonight, we cannot give individualized information and give individualized attention to every single person. We are here to help. We are aware that 421A is expiring. Everyone is anxious. I myself am anxious. I don't want people to self-evict. That is what I want everyone to walk away with. Do not self-evict. Come to the office. I am telling you right now, I am in the office tomorrow by 9:30 in the morning. If you want to stop by the office tomorrow morning, come on by. I will be there until about 1 o'clock tomorrow. Come by, we can talk. I will take your questions and we can get onto the road to answers.
What's your contact information?
I am at Tony Simone's office.
Okay.
Emma just put the contact information in the chat box.
I did, and I'll say it out loud too for everybody right now. So our office email is Simone, SIMONE, T as in Tony, at nyassembly.gov. You can also call our office at 212-807-7900.
00. Thank you. And for HCC, what is a good contact number? I've dealt with them for a long time. They have not gotten back to me. I was dealing with Yvette Nunez and never got any reply from her. Is there a good contact number that I can reach someone at HCC?
You could call our reception at 212-541-5996. And if
541
5996.
5996. Yeah, I usually just get the receptionist and she says she's given a message to Yvette, but no other action. Yvette doesn't get back.
Okay. So for everyone on the call, HCC, we're a community-based organization and located in Hell's Kitchen. And we have an intake procedure in case of, even if we've served you in the past, even if it was the past 6 months, if the case has been closed, then you have to go through a new intake. So
I'm not aware of the case being closed at all.
Okay.
I'm just looking for a good contact number to
I'm
discuss.
making an announcement for everybody on the call.
Oh, sorry.
So for anybody that wants to have a chance to speak with anyone at HCC regarding their individual specific situation, they need to make an appointment for either intake or Monday Night Legal Clinic. And our wonderful receptionist can do that for you. And if they don't answer the phone, you just leave a voicemail. And we're doing our best to help every single person that calls us.
This is from March of 2022.
All right, I just posted again in the chat the contact information for our office for Assemblymember Tony Simone. Feel free to email us, call us, and we will take it from there. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for joining us.
Nina.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Dira.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Georgie. Thank you to all the presenters. Have a good night. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Good job.